She sat by the window, watching rain streak down the glass, and told herself she'd done the right thing. She'd done the smart thing. Getting close to Min-ho meant risking a life he didn't understand, dangers that could follow her from a past that was never fully buried. She told herself she was protecting him. She was lying to herself, and by the third day alone in that safe house, she knew it. Because the truth was simpler and far more terrifying than any tactical justification she could construct. She had fallen in love with her own husband, and love, for a woman built out of discipline and survival, felt like the single most dangerous weapon ever pointed at her chest. On the fourth day, someone found her, but it was Min-ho. The knock at the safe house door came just after midnight, 3 sharp raps followed by silence, a pattern Amara recognized instantly and with dread pooling cold in her stomach. Not Min-ho's security. Not friendly. She was on her feet before the second knock finished, moving to the window, scanning the street below with the automatic precision of old training snapping back into place like a bone resetting. 2 black vehicles. For men she didn't recognize, moving with the disciplined spacing of professionals, not amateurs. Her pulse spiked, adrenaline flooding cold and familiar through her veins. She had exactly 90 seconds before they breached the door. Amara moved through the safe house with brutal efficiency, grabbing the go bag she'd instinctively packed the moment she'd arrived, weapons she'd kept hidden beneath the floorboards out of old habit, a habit she'd never quite let herself abandon even in the quiet domesticity of her marriage. She was out the back window and across the neighboring rooftop before the men below had finished breaching the front door, her body remembering movements it hadn't performed in 3 years with a fluency that frightened her. From a distance, crouched behind a water tower 2 buildings over, she watched them tear the safe house apart, methodical, searching. Not robbers, not random. This was targeted. This was someone from her old life finally catching up to the ghost she'd tried to become. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A number she hadn't seen in 3 years, blocked and rerouted through so many servers it shouldn't have been traceable at all. "They found you," the message read. "You're not the only one they're after. Check on your husband, now." Ice flooded through Amara's veins. She didn't hesitate. She was moving before she'd even fully processed the threat, sprinting through rain-slicked alleys toward the main road, flagging down a car with the kind of authority that brooked no argument, her mind racing through worst-case scenarios with the cold clarity of a soldier assessing a battlefield. Min-ho. If her past had truly caught up to her, if the people who'd once controlled every mission she'd run, every kill she'd made, every secret she'd buried had finally traced her to Seoul, then the man she loved, the man she'd left sleeping in an empty bed 4 days ago, was standing directly in the blast radius of a danger he didn't even know existed. She should never have married him. She should never have let herself fall for him. And now that love, the thing she'd run from because it terrified her more than any enemy ever had, might be the very thing that got him killed. The drive back to the estate felt like the longest of her life, every red light an agony, every mile a fresh wave of terror clawing up her throat. When she finally arrived, breathless, soaked from the rain, her carefully composed mask entirely abandoned, she found the estate's security detail in chaos, the front gate damaged, staff running in every direction. "Where is he?" she demanded of the first guard she reached, her voice carrying an authority that made the young man straighten instinctively. "Where is Kang Min-ho?" "Gone," the guard said, panic evident in his voice. "Taken 20 minutes ago. 4 men. They knew exactly where to find him, exactly when security would be thinnest. Ma'am, we don't know where they took him." The world seemed to tilt beneath Amara's feet. She had run from him to protect him, and in doing so had left him exposed and undefended, an easy target for a past she had never fully explained. This was her fault. Every second he was gone was a debt written in her own blood, and she intended to collect on it with everything the old life had ever taught her. She turned to the guard, her eyes hardening into something ancient and lethal, something the sweet, gardening, quiet wife of Kang Min-ho had never once shown this house. "Get me every piece of security footage from the last hour," she said, her voice flat, commanding, terrifyingly calm. "And someone bring me a weapon. Now." Because whoever had taken her husband was about to learn exactly what kind of woman they'd stolen him from. The footage told her everything she needed and nothing she wanted. 4 men, professional, moving with a precision that confirmed her worst fears, bypassing security systems with knowledge that could only have come from someone who'd studied the estate for weeks, maybe months. This hadn't been impulsive. This had been planned, patient, waiting for the exact moment Amara's absence left Min-ho vulnerable. She recognized one man's gait on the grainy footage, a slight favor of the left leg, an old injury she remembered from a mission 7 years ago in a country she wasn't allowed to name. Colonel Osai, former handler, a man who had once controlled her every movement, every kill, every breath of her old life, and who had never forgiven her for walking away. Her blood ran cold and then, immediately after, ice-hot with fury. "I know who has him," she said to the assembled security team, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her chest. "And I know exactly how to get him back." She spent the next hour transforming, not physically, though she did change into clothing built for movement rather than elegance, but internally, shedding the last remnants of the quiet, careful wife she'd spent 6 months constructing. The woman who emerged from that transformation was the one Min-ho had glimpsed only once, in the 4 seconds it took her to disarm a gunman in his own headquarters. Except this time, there would be no restraint. This time, someone she loved was on the line. She contacted the one person she trusted from her old life, a fellow operative who'd also walked away, who now ran logistics for a private security firm and owed Amara a debt that predated her marriage by years. "I need everything you have on Colonel Osai's current operations in Seoul," she said, voice clipped, professional. "And I need it in 20 minutes. "Amara," the voice on the other end said carefully, "if Osai has resurfaced, this isn't a rescue mission. This is a war." "Then I'll bring a war," Amara said and hung up. By the time the intelligence came through, Amara had assembled a small, brutally efficient team from Min-ho's own security personnel, men who'd initially underestimated her, and now watched with something close to awe as she laid out an extraction plan with the precision of someone who had run 100 operations exactly like this one. The warehouse where Osai was holding Min-ho sat on the industrial edge of Incheon, isolated, defensible, exactly the kind of location a man like Osai would choose. "He'll want to talk to me before he does anything to Min-ho," Amara said, studying the blueprint spread across the estate's dining table, her voice devoid of the softness that had defined her for the last 6 months. "Osai doesn't do anything without an audience. He'll use my husband as leverage to draw me in personally." "Then we don't let you go in alone," one of the security chiefs said. "I'm not asking permission," Amara replied, meeting his eyes without flinching. "I'm telling you what's going to happen. You get me within striking distance. I handle the rest." Because somewhere in that warehouse, the man who had cracked open 6 months of careful isolation, who had looked at her trembling in candlelight and called her beautiful instead of dangerous, who had chosen her with his eyes open even after learning exactly what she was, sat waiting for a wife who had once been trained to become exactly the kind of weapon his captors feared most. Amara intended to make sure that fear was justified. The warehouse loomed dark against the Incheon skyline as Amara's team approached under cover of the storm that had refused to let up all week, rain hammering the corrugated metal roof with a violence that would mask their approach. She moved at the front of the formation, weapon secured, every old instinct sharpening back into focus with a clarity that felt less like remembering and more like coming home to something she'd never truly left behind. Inside, Min-ho sat bound to a metal chair in the center of an otherwise empty room, blood dried along his temple from where he'd fought back before they'd subdued him, his suit torn, his composure, remarkably, still largely intact. Colonel Os paced in front of him, A tall, severe man whose calm demeanor made him infinitely more dangerous than any raging captor could have been. "Your wife," Osai said conversationally, "was the finest asset I ever trained. Do you know that, Chairman Kang? 29 confirmed. Precision that made grown men weep. And then she simply walked away. Buried herself in a marriage of all things, thinking she could outrun what she is." Min-ho said nothing, his jaw tight, his eyes calculating despite the ropes binding his wrists, despite the very real danger radiating off the man in front of him. He had built an empire on reading people, on finding leverage in silence, and he used every ounce of that skill now, waiting, watching, buying time he desperately hoped his wife would use. "She'll come," Min-ho finally said, voice steady despite the blood trickling toward his jaw. "And when she does, you'll understand exactly why she was your finest asset." Osei laughed low and humorless. "I'm counting on it." He didn't have to wait long. The warehouse's side door exploded inward with controlled precision, and Amara stepped through the settling dust and rain like something out of Osai's worst nightmares, weapon raised, eyes locked on the man who had once owned every part of her life he could control. "Hello, Colonel," she said, voice flat dangerous. "You shouldn't have touched him." What followed happened in under 90 seconds, a violence so swift and controlled that Min-ho, bound to his chair, could only watch in stunned silence as his quiet, gardening, tea-brewing wife dismantled 4 armed men with a brutal efficiency that belonged to another world entirely. Os alone remained standing when the dust settled, his weapon leveled at Amara's chest, hers leveled at his. "You always were too soft for this life," Osei said, breathing hard. "Marriage, love, it makes you predictable, Amara. It makes you weak." "No," Amara said, something fierce and unbreakable blazing in her eyes as she glanced, just once, toward Min-ho, still bound but alive, watching her with an expression that held no fear of what she was, only fury at what had been done to him and desperate relief at the sight of her. "It makes me have something worth fighting for. You never understood the difference." The standoff stretched, taut and electric, before Osai's resolve cracked, just slightly, just enough. Amara took the opening without hesitation, disarming him with a move so fast Min-ho barely registered it happening before Osai was on the ground, subdued, finished. She was at Min-ho's side in an instant, cutting his bindings with hands that trembled now that the danger had passed, now that the training could finally step aside, and let the terrified wife underneath finally surface. "I'm sorry," she whispered, cupping his face, checking every inch of him for injury with a desperation that had nothing to do with tactics and everything to do with love. "I ran because I was scared of exactly this, of you getting hurt because of who I used to be, and it happened anyway, and I am so sorry." Min-ho caught her wrists, pulling her hands away from his face just enough to look at her fully, blood and rain and exhaustion carved into every line of him, and yet his eyes held nothing but certainty. "You saved me," he said, voice rough. "You came back for me. That's all that matters, Amara. That's all that will ever matter." She broke then, the discipline of 29 confirmed kills and 3 years of careful hiding crumbling into something raw and human, and she pressed her forehead to his, breathing him in, alive, safe, hers. "I love you," she whispered, the words finally, terrifyingly free. "I've loved you for weeks and I was too afraid to say it, and I almost lost you because of that fear." "I love you too," Min-ho said, pulling her into his chest despite his injuries, despite the chaos still settling around them. "Now and always. Whatever you are, whoever you were, I choose you, Amara. I will always choose you." Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. Min-ho's security team already moving to secure Osai and his remaining men. But inside that warehouse, wrapped in each other amid the wreckage of a battle Amara had never wanted her husband to witness, something unbreakable finally settled into place between them. But even as they held each other, Amara knew this was far from over. Osai had spoken of others, of a network that had spent 3 years searching for her, of debts and secrets that extended far beyond one colonel's grudge. The danger that had found them tonight was only the opening move in a war that had been building since the moment she'd walked away from that life. And now, that war had found her husband, found her marriage, found the fragile new love they'd only just allowed themselves to claim. She held him tighter, already calculating, already planning, the soldier and the wife finally, fully merged into one woman who intended to burn down whatever remained of her old life before she let it touch this one again.